going to be the coaching video to help those who are leading an on-campus small group that's going to meet on Sunday, April the 3rd. So if you are one of those folks, if you're a leader, facilitator, teacher of one of those on-campus groups, then you've got the right video. Here, what we're going to do in the next few minutes is we're going to try to give you some things that could help you as you prepare to lead and teach your small group there on Sunday. I hope you got to be a part of one of the wonderful Easter services that we had this past Easter weekend. It was truly a great time at Dayspring to celebrate the risen Savior with so many. We had over 2,200 people that participated in those three different services, and it was just a great thing to see how all the Dayspring folks worked together to make room for one more, actually make room for about 1,000 more than normal. So that was a great thing, and we appreciate that. Thank you for being part of that, the leadership you give in your group, and we're looking forward to hopefully seeing some of those that were being with us on this particular weekend become more involved in being part of the discipleship process at Dayspring, but also more importantly, to having heard the gospel to respond to it. So here we are. We're following up on that, and we're continuing on in the series that we kind of had installment 1 that Brett started Sunday on the names of God. And we are talking about looking at the different names of God, especially from the Old Testament, as how God reveals himself through the names that we find there, the names that he gives about himself. And each one of those names is going to help us understand more about who God is, about his character, about his nature. And so that's the whole, really what this sermon series is going to be about, because as we look at the names of God, we're going to learn more about who God is and about how he relates to us as well. And we're going to be looking at the name of God for this Sunday. We're going to be focusing in on out of Exodus 3, where God refers to himself as Yahweh, I am that I am. And we'll be looking at the self-sustaining God and what that means, and how that what that means not only about who God is, but and how we can relate and respond to him as well. Now, the lesson we're going to be looking at is going to help us in that a little bit. Obviously, the ultimate revelation of who God is found in the person of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to kind of complement what we're looking at there on Sunday mornings by turning to the Gospel of Mark and looking chapter 1 and seeing in the life of Jesus that which reveals to us the very nature and character of God as well. And we're going to be looking at a specific aspect of God's nature and of his character, and that Jesus reveals to us out of what we'll be looking at there in Mark chapter 1 in the verses there 40 through 45. And what we're going to be focusing on is the character of compassion, how Jesus not only exhibited compassion, but what compassion is. We discover that. And then how, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, then how does compassion get worked out in our life as well. Now, let me just throw out this thought about compassion, because I think sometimes we have a little bit of misconception about what compassion is. Sometimes we think compassion has to do with the sense of seeing someone's situation, seeing someone's difficulty, seeing something they're involved in, or something they're going through, or some life situation that they find themselves in. And we have a sense of where we feel sorry for them. We have a sense of where we're sad for them in what they're going through. And we think oftentimes of that being compassion. But that's truly not what compassion is. Compassion is not only seeing people and seeing those who are in need, but we also see them as who they are, that they're people that are loved by God, that they matter to God, and then we seek to help them as we are able in the need that they have. So compassion has to do with us not just seeing their need and feeling sad for them or sorry for their situation, but it is that which we see who they are as a person that moves us then to do something about that as we can, as the resources we have, and so forth there. So that's one where we're going to be looking at. That's kind of the lesson overview. The introduction is going to be really helping us relate to the fact that Jesus is the ultimate revelation of who God is, and he is, in a sense, the spitting image of the Father, the Heavenly Father. You've heard like father, like son, like mother, like daughter. Well, that's what we see, like God, like Jesus there. And so that's the concept of what you're looking at there in the introduction to get us oriented then to what we're going to be studying in Mark chapter 1. Remember, if your small group is following the message, you can use some of the things that you've heard Sunday from Brett about helping lead into this message itself. And it's always a good thing, I think, to use it as an opportunity to allow people to kind of share some of the things they walked away with from that message on Sunday and making a transition or segue into what you're studying there out of Mark chapter 1. Now, in teaching the text, you have there the lesson manuscript in front of you. If you don't, pause the video now, get it printed out so that you have it there. I should have mentioned that earlier. And get ready then to kind of walk through and maybe take some notes. Some very good material here for you to look at. I encourage you, don't rush through it. Take your time. Look through this material. Some of it's going to need a little bit of thought by you, thinking through in your own heart and mind before you get ready to lead and teach your group there as well. By the way, I always mean to mention this a lot when I go through these videos, and if you haven't ever written this resource down, do this because I think it's a helpful resource for you, and I'll have it on the screen here for you as well. But there is a good free source for you that you can go on the internet, on the web, and pick up, and it's Constable's Notes, and I'll have the website listed there on the screen for you. And I encourage you to check that website out periodically and look at the notes that Dr. Constable has there, where he has taught through every book of the Bible, and he makes his notes, his teaching notes, very available to everyone at no cost, and a tremendous resource for you. And you might want to use that as you look at this particular passage as well for this coming Sunday. Now, there are basically two major teaching points that you're going to focus on, but a lot of material in each one of them. And the first one is there in the first few verses of Mark chapter 1. There are passage 40 through 42. And that first teaching point is this, is that Jesus is compassionate enough to see the most unwanted of people. And what we're looking at here is focusing on the fact that so often we overlook a lot of people around us. We look past them. We don't really see them. Because of their particular situation, maybe it's socioeconomic, maybe it's their ethnicity, maybe it's their race, their language, whatever it is will cause us at times just to look past people and not see them. And we're going to find out that was not true of Jesus, especially as we focus in on his interaction with a particular people of that time, in that culture, in that society, that were perhaps the most unwanted, the most overlooked, the most neglected. Those in many ways were looked at. These people were considered even not people because of this particular situation that they had, this physical malady that they had. It caused them to be that way. And we're talking about those that had leprosy. It might do you some good to kind of go in and do a little bit of research and look up about leprosy. See exactly what leprosy is, and maybe clear up some confusion about the disease itself. I think it's not only it's referred to as Hansen's disease, and get some ideas about really what leprosy is all about. And you can see as you do that, you'll find out that as you get more informed about the disease itself and those that have it, you'll see how some of this stuff that the people of that day, how they responded to lepers, was really unfortunate there, and because they had become a group of people that were the ultimate outcast of society, basically hands off completely. Your teaching tip there on page 4 gives you some good information as well in that regard, and you'll see there how it ties in the aspect of, because of this physical ailment that these people had, the prejudice, the bias that developed in society about them. Now, if you look over on page 5, you're going to see there, continue to teach through there. One of the things I just want to point out here and get you to let you expand on in your teaching time has to be the fact that Jesus looked past all of this stuff, all of the things about these lepers, and he saw most of all, this is what he saw. He saw a person that was loved by God. And because he saw that person, loved by God, an individual who God created, who mattered, who he cared about, he was able to push past all this other stuff. And there's a couple of questions that are asked down at the bottom of page 5. I think they'll make some very outstanding discussion questions for your group. One of those first of that says, what groups of people in our society would be the modern day lepers? In other words, people that we're encouraged to ignore. I think you ought to think that through as a group. Let me throw out a few things here that hopefully some of the people will respond with, that ought to give you some cause for reflection and some cause to think through and talk about. Because there are different groups in our own culture, in our own society, that have become those that we're encouraged to overlook, to not even consider, to not even think about. In fact, at times these groups are often not only said we're encouraged to not even think about or overlook them, but in fact we're encouraged to treat them not in a compassionate, kindly way, but just the opposite. There are certain ethnic groups that come to mind here in our world today, especially those that have Muslims or Muslim affiliations. That tends to cause a group that becomes a modern day leper. Those that have communicable diseases. Again, obviously there are things that we have to be aware of in that, but it's almost in some ways, some people have a certain type of disease that we see them as unwanted, and we push them away, not just to protect ourselves from their disease, but we push them away as a person. Those that are street people or homeless people oftentimes can become those that we overlook or do not really see. The refugees, that is becoming a hot subject, a hot topic in our own country. And not only refugees that in the environment that we find ourselves in, world, and the concern about terrorists and so forth, which are valid concerns. I'm not making light of that, but the fact that this has led to all refugees being seen in that light. How do we deal with that? How do we have compassion for those, as Jesus had compassion for those, and see them as people and move past this? So that's going to create some great opportunities for discussion for your group. And I'm sure there's going to be some with some very strong opinions in there. And I can understand that. But I think we have to come back to the bottom line, is that we have to see them. Finally, the bottom line is we see them as people that are loved by God. And we can never, ever forget that every person that we lock eyes with, no matter who they are, where they come from, what language they speak, what color their skin is, what their socioeconomic status, any of those things, the prejudice, the biases that we may have developed, we have to push past all of that and see them, number one, as a person that Jesus died for. And then it asks a follow-up question here: are there any such lepers who you feel a strong compulsion to help, even though the people around you won't get it or agree with? And again, that's going to create an opportunity for some discussions as well. On page 6, you continue to move into this discussion, and the material there helps us understand about that sense of compassion that Jesus had, because compassion ended up overruling everything else for Jesus. It allowed him to push past the religious, the cultural, the social norms, and to love that person as a person. And that's where we end up at when we look at the compassion of Jesus and as followers of Jesus. The second teaching point is verses 43 through 45, where it says Jesus' dedication to showing compassion kept him focused on his mission. See, the compassion of Jesus is what allowed him not to get sidetracked from the mission that he came for. And the reason that he came, we know, was so that he could die on a cross for our sins, be buried, and rise again. We celebrated that Sunday, the resurrection. And so all of those who put their faith in Jesus can have their sins forgiven. They can be made right with God. Jesus' mission was to reconcile people who were separated from God, to reconcile them to God, the God who loves them, cares about them, and the God that desires for them to know him. That was the mission of Jesus. And as you look through there, you're going to see there was a reason that Jesus gave to these, a reason that Jesus asked these lepers not to tell about what he had done for them, was so that he could stay focused on his mission and not get sidetracked off of that. And he wanted to make sure that the news about what he didn't get out, so that people would seek to elevate him to a position that he did not come for. Jesus did not come to be the political national liberator. Jesus came to be the spiritual liberator of all people, to liberate us from our sin, so that we can know the God who loves us and cares about him. The mission that Jesus came for remained his priority, and he was unwilling to let anything keep him from carrying out that mission. By the way, that mission is that which Jesus has handed off to us. He's handed off the mission of letting people know how they can be reconciled to God through what Jesus did for them and for us. And we as the people of God have to understand we cannot let anything keep us from getting derailed from the mission that God has handed off to us. In John chapter 20, Jesus said, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. We are to be the sent people carrying out the mission that Jesus accomplished for us through the cross, the burial, and the resurrection for all those who will believe in him. 2 Corinthians 5, we have the ministry of reconciliation, Paul says. And so we must never deviate from that. That is what God has called us to do. Matthew chapter, and that little gray area on page 7, Matthew chapter 4 is a reference there and gives you something to go back and look at as well in that regards. On page 8 wraps up the discussion there of the text material. And at the very last 2 paragraphs, or last 3 paragraphs, some very good information. Don't overlook that. Be sure to make that connection that he makes there about the impossible and how Jesus does what is impossible. He accomplishes the impossible, and he came so that the impossible could happen, that we who are sinners separated from God, condemned forever because of our sin, could be made right with God. And through Easter, that mission has been accomplished. He came to do what no one else could do. So make that connection. He goes back and points out of Numbers chapter 12, 2 Kings chapter 5, 2 individuals from the Old Testament, the only 2 that are referenced have a cured of leprosy, which was Miriam and which was Naaman, and how he did in their lives the impossible. And so keep that in mind as you go through this material here. There. On page 9 is your application moment. The handout is on page 11. So again, I encourage you as always, don't overlook that. Leave time there for that. And on page 10 is your conclusion. All right. Hey, have a great time together. I think you're going to find this a very challenging lesson, a challenging time for you as a group and as an individual. As always, make sure that you spend some time in advance to letting God speak to you as you get ready to lead, facilitate, teach your group, because you'll find out that what God teaches you, what he does in you, will allow you then to do the same for those in your small group. Have a great time together, and thanks for being a part of the discipleship process at
Savior, he can move the mountains. For my God